Welcome back to the Code Ryan podcast. Today, James joins me and we're going to discuss kind of his web development journey as well as some kind of Next.js topics and other web development related topics. But before we kind of get to the technical stuff, James, could you maybe just give me a rundown of kind of what your tech stories looks like so far? I know it's not necessarily the kind of traditional computer science route, so I'd be interested here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to school, did normal school things, and left school to become a civil engineer. So I studied an honors degree in civil engineering, and then I worked as a civil engineer for a little while, and I found that as an industry, you definitely take a hit to the work-life balance. So I was looking for other opportunities, and I just at the same time happened to be kind of looking into programming. It seemed like a bit of fun, and I really just genuinely enjoyed coding. Like, I just thought it was a good laugh. You can make a whole lot of random stuff. It really is like a good creative outlet for me. And so I decided to pursue that full time and just really went down the self-taught path, teach yourself to code, and then struggled my way into my first job as a software, well, I guess I was technically a full stack developer, but a software developer. And it's been like, I'm so stoked with the outcome. I'm just the industry is infinitely better to work for. I had a great company. I got to work remote, which suits my lifestyle and my personality. And just programming as an outlet compared to civil engineering is much faster turnover. And civil engineering, you'll put through a design, and if you're lucky, 10 years later, you might see it, built and constructed. Whereas like software, you want to try something, 10 minutes later, you can see the output doesn't work. It's just like, it really satisfies that build, test, continue within me. And that's where I am today.
So when you decided to kind of make that transition into software engineering, so it sounds like you had, at least some sort of propensity for software engineering to where you enjoyed kind of the process. So I think, check box one for a lot of people is, do you actually enjoy the process of coding and developing new things and different things like that? But it sounds like you kind of knew that you liked it, or were you not so sure? And then as you started doing it, you liked it more? Or?
It's a good question. When I was growing up as a child, like, I played a lot of World of Warcraft. You can probably see some of the stuff in the background. It's all World of Warcraft themed. Same with the t-shirt. And my dream job was always to work as a software engineer for Blizzard Entertainment. They don't look so hot flash as an employer anymore, but I think that I'd always kind of like painted this picture of what it was like to work in software. So I don't think necessarily the coding, like, I didn't really have much prior experience to programming, but I just knew, like, I'm a creature of, like, I'm a bit of an introvert. I like staying inside. I like being at my computer. And like, those kind of things seemed very aligned with the software engineering profession. So I think that's what gave me the initial enthusiasm towards it, is that like it fit this picture I'd created about the industry. And then I think that once I started coding, even just like, I started off learning JavaScript, and just the immediate experience I had was, okay, like, it's quick problem solving. It's like, you have a problem, how can you solve it? And you solve it through code. And that really worked for me. That was like, I hate writing reports. There's a lot of report writing in engineering. And that for me just absolutely does my head in. Whereas programming, on the other hand, it's like writing out math equation. Like, I like maths, and it's just problem solving, which I think was the first like hook for me, that I was like, yes, I can do this.
Gotcha. So it was more so kind of the lifestyle of a software engineer kind of fit the bill of kind of what you were looking for with the profession. And then as you kind of got into it a little bit more, you realize that, hey, this is just kind of problem solving in which you can you get an immediate response, whether you solve the problem or not.
Yeah, it's like a drug addiction.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. You get a little bit of a dopamine hit every time that you kind of solve a new problem.
That's exactly what happens.
Awesome. And I know for me personally, it was like, when I started coding, I actually didn't like it a ton because I was just so bad at it. And it's like, I don't even know like what a variable is and like what the heck is a for loop. And it was just really frustrating at the start.
Yeah.
But after, those first several weeks of not knowing anything, you kind of start picking things up. And then once I started actually getting into it more and maybe after a couple of months and I could actually solve problems like on my own, it became much more fun. Was that similar for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. I think that I got ADHD, and so my brain is very selective with the things that it chooses to pursue. But when it does choose to pursue something, I'll just smash my head against the wall until it clicks. And so I think like I remember when I was first picking up coding, like if I ever hit into a barrier, I don't think I was ever discouraged. Like I would sit in front of a problem for 48 hours and just smack my head against the wall until eventually I just broke through. So that for me, just because I was like into it, I think that I found it quite easy. Like the ball started rolling real quick, and it just kind of snowballed out of control. But I definitely understand that coming into programming, there are a lot of hurdles that can feel very discouraging for a lot of people. And I think that, I mean, I've absolutely experienced it to 100%. And I think that even just getting like the resources and assistance kind of just, if you're going to risk it for the biscuit and go alone, is challenging. So definitely when I was, struggling with stuff at the start, like I didn't have anyone to turn to. So it's like, if you've got a problem, even if it's simple, but if you can't find a solution, then you kind of just you're stuck with yourself to figure it out and eventually, navigate that. But yeah, it can be tough to dive into 100%.
What was like the steps that you took to eventually become a software engineer? Like, were there certain resources that you use that you really enjoyed and liked that you would recommend others using? Or what was like the process for you? Like, okay, today you've decided that you want to just go straight into software engineering. Did you look for courses? Did you look for online classes? Did you consider boot camps? Or what was like kind of the step-by-step process that you took to eventually kind of get your foot in the door somewhere?
That's a good question. I would say the first thing that gave me encouragement that I could do it was I remember hearing like stories about companies who would hire a 17-year-old who hadn't even finished school because they just knew how to program and they could do the stuff. So I was like, all right, well, if you can show that you can code, you can get a job without the qualification. So that was the first thing that I needed that would reassure me, because there's a lot of people on the internet who are like fearmonger and they're like, oh, self-taught programming is dead. You'll never do it. And like, for me, that's just a really defeatist mindset. And so I kind of held on to that thing. And the first thing that I was like, all right, so if this kid can do it, I need credibility. So somehow I need to prove that I can do the things that companies need me to do. And the second thing I did that directed me was felt like I should reverse engineer the entire process. So I started looking up what jobs I wanted to have on LinkedIn and different job application boards, and would like list out the technology and skills that they wanted me to have. And then, you kind of simmer that whole process down and you end up with a list of maybe 10 to 15 things that it's like, all right, these are the things that I need to show that I can do. And after that, it was just figuring out what resources will direct me to the desired outcome. A couple of my friends were in the industry, so I sent them a message being like, if you're going to learn, or like, how do you teach yourself programming outside of your qualification? As for paid boot camps, I don't know about, I feel like I didn't have the confidence in any particular boot camp to commit money towards it. So I was like, I'll just, until I've run out of resources doing it free, I'll do it free. And I didn't run out of free resources, so I never paid for a boot camp. And I was actually, I had this is an anecdotal story. I tutored someone who was in a boot camp while I was learning to code, and I was helping them through React. And it sounded like a terrible experience. I really like creating my own path and having the flexibility to pursue the things that I want to pursue. And I remember tutoring him, and we were covering some programming concepts that were slightly advanced of his course. And, he submitted an assignment doing this stuff, and they gave him a really terrible grade because they felt like he shouldn't have known that information and like he'd kind of cheated the assessment. And I was like, that's just absolutely wild. So I don't know. I'm not sold on boot camps personally. I just think it's too much of a hit or miss, and they're just like trying to, cash you out. But I mean, like, in saying that, I acknowledge they can connect you to jobs, but that wasn't a thing for me. And then, so as for free resources, yeah, I talked to some of my friends, and one friend recommended Free Code Camp. and I just did their JavaScript curriculum. And then after that, that was probably the main actual curriculum or certificate that I followed. And then everything else was just tutorials, YouTube tutorials, and then making my own stuff and just getting my hands dirty.
No, absolutely. And I also went the entirely self-taught route without boot camps or anything like that. And Free Code Camp was another resource that I used a lot. And, when, because I'm sure you'll have it too. Some of my friends are in other career will be like, hey, I'm thinking about switching careers, getting into it. Do you recommend like going to a boot camp or something like this? And I have very similar thoughts to you, to where it's like, I mean, every resource that you need to learn what you need to know is out online for free. Like,
yeah, huge.
There's so much information out there. And I think what a lot of people think when they sign up for a boot camp is that like, it's almost the easy route. Like if you sign up for a boot camp, you'll get a job, when in reality, it's like, you still have to force yourself to learn things and to figure out how to learn different things on your own, because I'm sure you found out once you got a job, the learning doesn't stop there. Like you still have to continuously keep learning new things and stuff like that. So I think learning how to pick up new technologies is like a skill in of itself, and kind of throwing your feet to the fire a little bit and just being a little bit more self-taught definitely isn't a bad route to go. But, then again, I've heard of some people having a really good experience with boot camps to where they really needed kind of that structure. They just, they would start learning JavaScript, and then they would switch right away to Next.js, and then they'd go back to JavaScript because they realized they didn't really know it, and then they'd learn HTML. They're just all over the place, to where boot camp can give you that kind of structure. But then again, there's a lot of content online that will kind of show you the structure that you might need to have, and go about things that way. So I think we have very similar approaches when it comes to that.
Yeah, I actually think that if you can do it self-taught, like, I think you're definitely right that the ability to learn new information effectively is a skill set that is, actually really essential being an effective programmer. So I think if you can risk it, if you can suss it alone, it's going to be hugely advantageous for you in your career. Yeah, but I mean, like, you're totally right. I think that I feel like a lot of people come across the paralysis of choice, which is when you are just overwhelmed by like if you think about traditional educational institutions, they do give you a pathway. They tell you what to learn and where to, direct your attention. And that's how most of us are familiar learning. You get told what you need for this assignment, and then that's the test that you sit. So it's like, whereas suddenly you're exactly right, create your own pathway. And that's why I really found reverse engineering the process for me was important, because I actually created my own path, and I could say, okay, this is where I start. This is what I need to know before I can progress to the next step. And so it just stopped me from being too all over the place and just, getting overwhelmed by the endless pathways you could pursue.
Absolutely. And, when people ask, what do I need to know to get a job? Well, that answer's a leg right there in front of you, to where, like you said, if you go to LinkedIn, think of like shoot for the stars, so to speak. Like think about a company that would excite you to work for. Go check out what their job requirements are.
Yep.
They will very clearly tell you that there's like some required kind of skill sets as well as some optional skill sets, to where like for most development jobs, it's going to be required that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And as you look through several different jobs that interest you, you're probably going to see that on every single job description, which is a pretty good indicator that you're going to have to learn those 3 technologies if you were to be a developer for that company. And, I think you're also going to spot different trends as well of, maybe these 4 companies said that it's also good to know React, and then one company said it would be good to know like Angular. Well, based on the companies that you want to learn there, maybe you go towards React, or, I'm sure based on your reaction there, if you ask us, we would probably send you away from Angular as well. But people can go whatever they want there.
Guilty.
Yeah. When you came to like proving that you could learn to code, I'm guessing that you probably built out your own maybe portfolio of projects or different things like that, or how did you like try to demonstrate that you could actually code?
Yeah, so I mean, it comes back to the credibility part, in that honestly, I feel like a lot of everything I did rested on this one idea that this young kid got a job without any qualification because of the stuff that they'd done. So from that singular story, you can infer that, okay, this kid has produced something impressive to the point where people want to employ him. So I need to do the same thing. I need to create something that's, standalone, demonstrates my skill set, and you know, will give me that check. Because, like, if you go through an institution, you are accredited, they accredit you. Whereas if you're doing it alone, you need to have your own stuff to show that you can, walk the talk. And projects, I was like, all right, if I'm going to get a job, I need to be able to show that I can code, which is, plus projects actually, as part of learning, I actually found was probably the biggest part for me. I really enjoy just making random stuff all the time. It like really satisfies some weird creativity need that I have. And it just like, it's part of that whole problem solving thing. It's like, okay, how can I make everything infinitely more optimized and stuff like that? So yeah, projects was a huge part. I made a whole lot of terrible stuff to start out with, and I think that's just natural. Like really atrocious, diabolically bad, appalling. But you do it, and I think, yeah, love making projects. I think for me, it just further developed my addiction to programming. And even today, whenever amongst everything that I do, I always like to have like a side project that I'm just working on just to satisfy that inner need to just be building something random that has no purpose, no intention. I'm just making it for the sake of, and the creativity and the personalization. But definitely the projects was a huge part in getting a job. My interview was 90% me going through my portfolio and just being like, oh, look at this cool thing I made. And then you should hire me because, it's pretty aligned to the stuff that you make. And I think that's also why, I remember in the interviews, they were saying that, like, you clearly have the ability to build stuff, which is what we're looking for. And I think even working with people, a lot of people who come out of like a software engineering qualification, like software engineering qualifications, a lot of them will fluff out their courses with, a lot of theory. And I think that the theory in the long term is absolutely great to know. But it's kind of, it's like if you if you think about construction or being a builder, you do an apprenticeship. It's a very practical course. Like, okay, this is how you build a house. Whereas, like, if you went to school and just learned all the theory about building a house, when you come to site, you're going to be useless. Even though technically you know how to build a house, you don't have any of the practical skills that go into it. And I think that a lot of people who do come out of qualifications then have to, they have that kind of green period where they have to then learn how to put all their skills into practical applications, which is something that I didn't have to stress about. I could start working and start coding immediately, and everyone's like, oh, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same exact experience to where when I was hired at my first company and still my current company to this day, I got super lucky that the first company I got hired from ended up being like fantastic company to work for and all that stuff. But when I was hired, there was another person that was hired about 6 months before me that came out of the more kind of classic CS background. And one thing that I did notice is that that individual, also, I'm not talking bad about this individual, great person at all, but they really struggled kind of applying some of the stuff that they learned. Like they learned like Java and just like theory of coding and software engineering. And then they were thrown into React and they're like, really struggling to learn about hooks and how all this stuff works. Whereas for myself, I was already building projects in React. I could build like a full user interface with React. And that's kind of what I was working on regularly. So I was able to be, super productive relative to someone that just came out of kind of a computer science background. And it sounds like you had a very kind of similar path there.
Yeah.
And kind of with that, you kind of mentioned building your own project. So did you ever get stuck in kind of that beginner trap of just watching tutorial after tutorial after tutorial, not actually trying to do a project? Or did you always kind of naturally gravitate towards actually building stuff?
I think definitely initially I was tutorial reliant, but I think I was quite lucky that I managed to break the cycle of, needing someone to walk me through these things just very incidentally, because whenever I would, not immediately, but after a bit, when I didn't like the idea of just doing someone else's project and putting it in my portfolio and saying it was mine. So whenever I would do a tutorial, I would, at the end of it, think, okay, this is, I get like the general gist of how this code works and what it can be used for. How can I now turn this into something that can have like an equivalent infrastructure, but is a totally different thing? So, like if it was like a CRUD application, you can take one to-do application and turn it into, like a planner or, a million other things, a note-taking application or something that's totally different. And then by the time you've, repainted a couple of things, changed the font, changed the color, added some extra functions, some extra, bits and pieces, I would have like a unique project that I could then add to my portfolio, and I would just be like, I wouldn't just say, oh, I did this tutorial and, I got to the end. I would say I built this. And I think that just so happened to be the secret sauce for me to gain the ability to independently code. And I think that it actually, like now I'll build something totally from scratch. But at the start, like a lot of people will try to make their own stuff. And it is too hard because, I mean, like making your own project from scratch is not like an easy thing. And it's not something, when you're like a newbie to coding, it's not going to be immediately obvious. So I totally understand, I technically was reliant on a tutorial to get me up and running. And they would get me up and running, kind of give me the like core, tech or like examples I would need. And then, once I'm running, then I can turn it into my own thing. So that was what I found stopped me being totally reliant, is that like the secondary independent coding part where I would take something I've learned and then apply it in a new context. And the other thing I really like about it is like when you do a tutorial, they'll give you examples on how to do everything. Like if you have a function that's going to update a state, it's like, okay, this is how we've done it in the tutorial. In this example, I've got this new state that I've made, so I'm going to update it in an analogous way that's maybe is tweaked slightly differently. But suddenly I've written my own function to do its own thing, and if you keep doing that, that will once again snowball out of control until you're just like, oh, I know how to do everything. Well, not everything, but a lot of stuff independently.
Right. And, that, like you even mentioned that for your job, it was important for you to actually explain your projects and kind of go through the code a little bit. And like, it sounds like they kind of vetted out, like, did you actually code a lot of this project, or did you just code along with the tutorial and then throw it in a portfolio to say that you did it? So it sounds like, at least for you, and I would assume for a lot of people, it's going to be really important for, if you have those portfolio projects, make sure that you can actually have a conversation about them and kind of back them up. And the best way to do that is actually doing the project yourself, and not just like grabbing a project off a tutorial.
Yeah, and I think that the part that really helps with that is that if you do turn it into your own thing, like most of the projects that I initially built were things that I wanted to make my life better. So when I would turn them into something, they were things that I was like, I could almost speak quite passionately about. I was like, okay, here's the problem. This is how I tried to solve it. These are all the things that I did. And I could speak to every single, even just like the smallest details that I'd added in for a particular thing. I could kind of say, I could speak to everything. Whereas it's like, if you're kind of following someone else's work, you're not, it's not like you can see their vision, or like if you're rebuilding Facebook, it's like, oh, cool, I've just cloned the application, I guess. And there's not like a lot of personality that comes through that process, or like even independent thought, like a really good skill set to have when people hire you is the ability to see a problem, solve a problem. So if you can kind of show that initiative and even a bit of innovation, I think that's just going to further make everything seem more impressive, even if it looks terrible. Like I think the enthusiasm, the initiative, and all that is a great skill set to demonstrate.
Absolutely. And I know, like, for me personally, two of my portfolio projects, one was like a craft store for my mom because she recently
Classic.
Retired, and then she like started doing crafts and stuff.
Cool.
So like speaking about that with the guy that was interviewing me, he could tell that I was like, actually like passionate about this a little bit because I was like building this for my mom and like trying to do this and like talk through like some of the issues I had with it. And he could tell that it wasn't just like a copy and paste, like you said, Facebook clone or Spotify clone or whatever you see. Like, I'm sure hundreds and hundreds of people have that stuff in their like portfolio. But if you see someone has like a store called Karen's Crafts by mom's name, then it's probably like, a little bit more unique. And then I
So
can
much
actually,
more exciting.
yes, absolutely. And then one thing that I'll recommend to people as well is like for those initial projects that you try to build on your own, do something that interests you personally.
Infinitely.
Like, for me, my Karen's Crafts is one of them. I also really like watches. So I built like a watch inventory or a watch list kind of project and stuff. So like just a couple of areas that interest me and then kind of building a product behind that. It made it so much more interesting and fun for me rather than just like forcing myself to do like, a Spotify clone or something that I really just didn't care much about.
Absolutely. No. And even like when you get stuck, if it's a boring project, it's just going to be like an app. It's going to be the most tedious process to get through the bug. Whereas if you're really, committed to the outcome, you're like, I really want to make this, the debugging process and the sticking points for programming are going to just feel like lightweight. You'll rip through them like they're no tomorrow. You'll have the enthusiasm to get to the desired outcome and you'll be an unstoppable force.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like your process as well for kind of breaking out of tutorial hell. As one thing that I did is like, I would follow along with tutorials because I think you kind of have to when you're first starting out. Like you said, it's so hard to just start a project from scratch when you basically know nothing. So following a tutorial, but also like say they're building a project in React, they build out like a menu component. Okay, once they finish building that out and say you code along with it first, go back, build that component yourself. So I would start just rebuilding some of the components that the instructor did. And then I would kind of keep doing that. I would play around with it, start learning from there. And then we'd finish the course. And I'd do a very similar thing to you to where I would either try to rebuild that project just like they did with similar functionality or build like a parallel project. So if they built like, your example earlier to where they build a basic CRUD application, you turn it into a planer or something like that with some different styles. And you really see how things piece together. And before you know it, you'll be able to actually build your own projects from scratch with something that really interests you. So I think that's a good process for things.
Oh, huge. And the other thing I'd just say, I think that, as a new programmer, it's really important to understand like best practice coding. And I think that if you don't, like even like an example is data fetching in React, it's totally different from how you would fetch data in just a vanilla JavaScript project. And I think that there is a best practice implementation that if you just kind of risk it for the biscuit, it's just not worth it. So I think that it's really good to do a tutorial, to learn the best practice, to have the example, and then learn how to create your own version based off that best practice to ensure that when you're coding, you're not just like having bad code upon bad code. It's like everything is still like on fleek. And then, as you start to build it yourself, it's like you've learned from the best and you know the best practice. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are tons of great instructors out there, great resources to where I know there's even like, so one of the courses I took when I was just starting was like Python for Everybody. And that is basically a free course on Coursera taught by an instructor at the University of Michigan here in the States. So like, I would say a very reputable instructor as well as university. And you can take that course online for basically free. I think if you want to like submit your projects and stuff, you have to pay like a $20 monthly fee or something, but you can get all the content for free. So I think that, learning those best practices, finding that balance between tutorials to actually learn the concepts and best practices and building stuff out yourself is really good advice there. So
100%.
With that, James, we're coming up on time here, but is there any, just final general advice that you would give someone for kind of transitioning, or even if it's someone that is early on in their career and want to get better at software engineering, is there any final things you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, I think that the main thing I would say is there's going to be there is a huge defeatist mindset out there where people, even on Reddit, people are just gonna be like, oh, you can't do that. It doesn't work. The market is saturated. Oh, AI is gonna replace your job. There's just so much negativity, and I think that if there's always room for an exception, and it's going to be the one person who just doesn't listen to anyone. And I'm not saying like you shouldn't be pre-calculated about the way that you approach. You shouldn't just go into it totally unprepared. But if you have a plan and you want an outcome, you absolutely can work towards that outcome. Like if I had to listen to half the stuff that's on the internet about people saying you can't do it, I wouldn't have got to the outcome that I'm so pleased that I have, gotten here. So I'd really just say, if you want it, make it happen, and do the things you need to do to make it happen. Don't let people tell you that you can't. It's not worth listening to.
Yep, absolutely. I love that. And I know that I get comments on some of my YouTube videos. I'm sure you probably do as well, to where people are like, is it even worth it to learn to code anymore? The job market's way too hard to get into, and AI is going to replace everybody. I'm just like, with that attitude, you're not going to be able to get any job into any industry. Like, there's always going to be competition for good jobs. There's always going to be different technologies that are developing that, if you don't level up your skill set, you could get replaced. So like, you just have to keep getting better, find like an industry that you enjoy, and get as best you can in there. And I'm very confident that someone's going to be fine if they do that. So
absolutely. Stop looking at everybody else and just, focus inwards and, manifest your outcome, manifest your reality.
Absolutely. Well, if someone wants to kind of find you online or wants to go check out any of your stuff, where can they go do that?
Probably the YouTube channel is the biggest one. Small James, classic. Learn to code YouTubes. Hopefully it's the channel I wish I had as I was learning to program. Is the goal for the channel. But I also, we make a whole lot of random stuff, learn a whole lot of random stuff too, and it's a good laugh. Check it out.
I will link that in the description below, and thank you so much for coming on today.
Dude, cheers for having me. It's been cool to talk about programming. I'm totally down for it anytime.